And thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here again in Zagreb to see my old friends Luca, Ivana, Pavel, Martino. I'm very happy for this opportunity to present here part of my research which concerns Valerian Magni. I think that he's now completely or almost unknown philosopher of the first part of the 17th century. Although in his period he was very known, and I will show you why. And I will focus mostly on his vacuum experiments. These are also not very known, these vacuum experiments. Although for instance, Leibniz, as he refers to vacuum experiments, he calls them Torricelli's and Magni's experiments, deliberately omitting Pascal. So he was very famous in his time, but not only because of vacuum experiments. If we, for instance, look into the very famous book written by Edward Grant with a funny title, Much Ado About Nothing, it signifies something. The book about vacuum. And the controversies around vacuum in Middle Ages and early modern period, we cannot find the name Valerian Magni there. Although, as I told you, these experiments were very famous. But for instance, in the second book, or in this book, written by Peter Deer, Discipline and Experience, we can find there some pages dedicated to Valerian Magni's experiments. But my aim is not to present here these vacuum experiments in the framework of the history of science, as one of the numerous historical points that can be put on the list of scientific achievements. I would like to show rather their interconnections, these experiments, with Magni's philosophical system as one of the fundamental steps that can be proved the untenability of Aristotelianism on one hand, and on the other hand, in a positive part of his philosophy, as a demonstration that can support his metaphysics of light. So in the first part of my talk, I will mention the main milestones of Valerian Magni's life and his most important works, just to present the context and to show you who Valerian, and to say just who Valerian Magni was. Then I will move to his vacuum experiments and what controversies have arisen. And then I will move to the relationship of vacuum experiments with Magni's metaphysics and his attempt to create a new philosophical system that could respect an up-to-date natural philosophy, I mean the natural philosophy of his time, and on the other hand that could be called Christian philosophy, because that was the main aim of Valerian Magni's philosophy and philosophical theological system, to create a Christian philosophy. But firstly, I would like to also mention or emphasize that Valerian Magni performed his vacuum experiments in Warsaw in 1647, and as he printed it, the description of this vacuum experiment, that was the first printed book dedicated to vacuum experiments at all, so before Pascal, and that's why it provokes such or huge, vast controversy. So now to the to some data. He was born in Milano, but as a child he moved to Prague, and then he entered, despite the descent of his family, to Capuchin order, new Capuchin order. In that time, very progressive in the sense of spiritual life. And he became very influential within the Capuchin order because he became a superior of the Czech Austrian province. He also taught at different Capuchin schools, and he also became an advisor of Prague Archbishop, Cardinal Harrach. And from that time there are some controversies between Cardinal Harrach and the Jesuits. And it's very interesting that also from 1626, as you can see, he became a missionary, a legate of the new congregation, the Propaganda Fide, so he was very influential ecclesiastic politician. In 1628 he wrote a very important book from the theological point of view. It was a polemical book, De a Catholicorum Credendi Regula Judicium, that was published many times, and in which he attacked principles of Protestant theology, and it also provoked a huge discussion, vast discussion between Valerian Magni and theologians of different Protestant churches, Reformed, Lutherans, and so on. Magni published this Judicium many times, and all the time he involved there the entire controversy, and he reacted on the thought of his opponents. It is a polemical work, theological work, and I will not deal with it now. So I'll move to other parts of other interesting milestones of Valerian Magni's life. Interesting is that we know that in 1633 he asked Giovanni Buonamici for a report concerning Galileo's trial, so he was very well aware of what had happened with Galileo, and he even attempted to publish Galileo's Discorsi in Moravia, in the printing shop of Moravian Cardinal Dietrichstein, but with no success because the cardinal died, and as you know, it was later published, this Discorsi in Leiden. But this this attempt to publish Galileo's Discorsi is very important for his vacuum experiments.
Sorry, so was there a direct contact between Magni and Galileo?
No, there was no direct contact. He had friends in Rome, and they sent him reports. In 1642 he published his first philosophical books. So his first philosophical book was written he wrote it as he was 56. This De Luce Mentium and De Luce Imagine, that was very important for his later attempt to create a philosophical system. Already from the title you can see that it's somehow connected with metaphysics of light, and that it is also somehow depended on Saint Bonaventure, because Saint Bonaventure became how to say order philosopher of Capuchin order. Valerian Magni tried to elaborate his philosophical system as an elaboration of Bonaventure's philosophy and theology. It was also published many times you can see the first edition that was published in Rome, and here is another title, another work from which you can see that he really followed Augustine and Saint Augustine and Saint Bonaventure. I will move to it later. So, in 1644 he was sent to Poland and he became an advisor of the Polish king Vladislav IV. In that time he was still delegate of the congregation, the Propaganda Fide. And there he performed his experiments with vacuum in 1647 in Warsaw. It's called Demonstratio Ocularis, so that will be in focus of my talk. And also he wrote a very interesting work, De Atheismo Aristotelis. And after that he tried to create his philosophical system. He published these books, Filosofia Dei Pare, Principia et Specimen Philosophiae, and finally Opus Philosophicum, which he published only 2 parts of it, and the rest became the rest we can find only in the manuscript form. And in 1661 he was captured in Vienna because he attacked very strongly the Jesuit order, and so he was captured in Vienna because the Jesuits were advisors of the Austrian emperor, and he was sent to Rome, but he died on the way, and he's burned. We can find his grave in Salzburg. So here are the Philosophia Dei Pare and Principia et Specimen, and here you can see this Opus Philosophicum, his attempt to create a vast philosophical system. He published only 2 parts, and you can see the structure of his philosophy of this project. He only published the Philosophia quid logica metaphysica, but Rudimentum Mathematicae and Physica, it remained only in manuscript, and probably he didn't wrote this Pansophy. At least I didn't find it in the archive of the Capuchin order in Vienna. Because what is meant by Pansophia? What is that? It's connected with well, all knowledge. That was the idea, to create the knowledge which could cover everything, and this was very well. That was the main point of, for instance, Comenius's philosophy, Leonardus Comenius, and other thinkers of the mid of the 17th century, who tried to create kind of this all knowledge. And for instance, Comenius followed here Patrizii, using these prefixes. So he had there Panaudia, and so on. Panglotia, Pancosmia as well. Pansophia is it should cover all knowledge. So it's a Baroque kind of thinking, just to create the universal system which could answer everything. So now I will move onto the sorry, I should find it. His experiments with vacuum. So Magni performed his vacuum experiment in Warsaw in the presence of the king and queen of Poland. July 12th, 1647, and subsequently he published there in Warsaw the description of it as the first published description of the vacuum experiments proving the existence of vacuums. It was published in the form of a historical narration, Facti Historia, followed by the explanatory part. It was then republished 8 times, this Demonstratio Oculari, so here you can find two edition, and there is another publication of this Demonstratio Ocularis as the part of Admiranda de Vacuo, and in every edition he included there some controversies and his own reactions on these controversies. Magni stated at the beginning of the treatise that he was attracted in his experiments with vacuum by a passage from a certain work of Galileo Galilei. So it was published 1647, so he follows Galileo Galilei. His work where Galileo narrates that it is impossible to move water by means of a mechanical tool, that means by pump, at the height of more than 18 cubits. Of course, he had to have in his mind the discorsi dimostrazioni matematiche intorno a due nuove scienze that he unsuccessfully attempted to publish in Moravia. Following this information, Magni, in his own words, concluded that mercury, which has a higher density, could not exceed a height of 2 cubits. This experiment, as Magni emphasized, should solve the most important question which has ever been put from the creation of the world. This is not a rhetorical expression, only a rhetorical expression, as the title of Grant's book on vacuum, much ado about nothing, would indicate. For Magni, as we will see, it was really a crucial question that has a fundamental impact on his view of the reality. In the narrative part of the treatise, Magni writes that he filled with mercury a glass tube 2 cubits long, opened at one end here, closed it at the open end with his finger, turned it vertically and placed it into basin containing mercury. The basin was in a larger basin filled with water. After removing his finger, as he removed the finger here, the mercury in the tube descended and steadied itself at the height of 1 cubit, just here. Magni reports that he saw void at the upper part of the tube. Respectively, he says that he saw a place where nothing was placed, locus sine locato. So, according to Magni, here must be void, vacuum. He consequently continued the experiment with the aim of eliminating objections which could be raised by Aristotelians denying the existence of vacuum. According to peripatetic natural philosophy, nature should resist void. Air penetrating pores of glass here should fill the upper part of the tube. So according to Aristotelians, there is no void, but there must be air which penetrated through the glass. Magni therefore closed the end of the tube with his finger again, so he closed it here, pulled it into the part of the larger basin, filled it containing water, and removed his finger again for a short while. He observed water flowing rapidly into the upper part of the tube and filling it. So he observed water moving there and filling this part. This would have been impossible in his view if the place had been filled with air. So there had to be vacuum. Aiming to disprove the existence of the air in the tube completely, Magni subsequently pulled the tube out of the basin with water, thus allowing some air to enter. He plugged the open end with his thumb once again and observed how the air in the tube moved through the mercury and water above the surface of the water like a shining pearl. This pearl moved up and down the tube depending on how he turned it. He did not observe, therefore, any other air in the tube, aside the air he briefly allowed in. So, this was the summary of the first part of the treatise, so-called Historia Facti. I would like to stress that this was the first description of such an experiment that was ever published. And this is also why the treatise provokes so vast controversies of different kinds, as we will see. I would also like to emphasize that later, in connection with Robert Boyle's experiments, or Robert Boyle's program of experimental sciences, for instance, Shapin and Schaeffer in their famous book Leviathan and the Air Pump, show a specific genre of how to describe experiments was created. But it was this genre was emerging about 10 years later. So that was the first description in the way of in the style of narration, how to perform, how the experiment was performed. So before I will move on to the second explanatory part of the treatise, I will shortly describe a controversy that arose from the side which Magni did not expect. I told you that there were different kinds of controversies, and this was one controversy which Magni didn't expect. Pierre de Noailles, the secretary of the Polish Queen, because Polish Queen was French, was present in the audience of Magni's demonstration. He, Pierre de Noailles, immediately informed French mathematician Gilles Persson de Roberval and Franciscan philosopher Marin Mersenne about the experiment, and he sent them copies of Magni's treatise Demonstratio Ocularis. Gilles Persson de Roberval attacked Magni in a letter to Pierre de Noailles, dated in October of 1647, in which he accused Magni of plagiarism, for experiments with vacuum had been performed by Torricelli before, and by Pascal first. Roberval described how awareness of Torricelli's experiments spread to France in 1644 already through Marin Mersenne. He goes on to claim that Magni, who knew Mersenne very well, with evidence that they had met in Rome in 1645, that's really true, also must have known about the experiments that Torricelli performed in Florence in 1643, and yet published them as his own. Secondly, during his visit to Mersenne in Paris, Blaise Pascal learned about the publication and immediately denied Faber's Valerian's claims. Magni's description was subsequently republished in France in the autumn 1647, together with an earlier letter from Pierre Petit to Pierre Chany from the year 1646. In the letter, Petit briefly described how, at Marin Mercin's suggestion, he was present at Pascal Rouen's experiment in the autumn of 1646 with a glass tube filled with mercury, which, following Torricelli's barometer experiments, proved the existence of vacuum. So, the editor of the foreword therefore pointed out that Magni's Demonstratio Ocularis was not original, since Torricelli and Blaise Pascal conducted the experiments earlier, but they didn't publish it. Magni's treatise provoked Blaise Pascal to publish his celebrating Expériences Nouvelles in haste, and in order to demonstrate the priority of his experiments against Magni's activity as soon as possible. Magni was deeply affected by this accusation and published Robert Vast's letter to get, this is publication from Magni's own works. So he included the attack, he included into his own, I think it was the 4th edition of Demonstratio Ocularis. So he published it together with his own response. He defended himself by introducing his personal history, writing that he had known or heard, had not known or heard about Torricelli and the others before his experiment, and that he had performed his vacuum demonstration only on the basis of his reading of Galileo. Magni and Marin Mersenne really met in Rome, and but Magni says that they were not talking about it. They were talking about Descartes, because Marin Mersenne recommended Magni to read Descartes' Meditations, because Marin Mersenne found that Descartes' Meditations are very similar to Valerian Magni's De Luce Mentium et Eius Imagine. But Valerian Magni was not interested in Descartes, because he constructed his philosophy from his own philosophical mind, so because he was analyzing his own cognitive activities, and he didn't need to read any other book how to analyze these cognitive activities. So they were really talking. They met, but Valerian Magni says that they were not talking about Torricelli. So the question of Magni's alleged plagiarism is difficult to resolve to a satisfactory level. In any case, the controversy on the site ended in the late 1647. It seems that Mersenne, who actually knew Magni personally and had sympathy for the Capuchin, never commented on the case. Pascal's indignation also subsided when in February 1648 he admitted that Noël's writings countering the vacuum were not a personal attack on him, on Pascal, but rather on Magni. Pascal later, with a sympathy, mentions Magni in his letters, where he prizes Father Valerian as an excellent thinker who suffered from the Jesuits. The Capuchin, although hurt initially, never condemned his French colleagues. On contrary, in his later writings on vacuum, he presented a group of scholars who were fast to stand against Aristotelian dogmata, and, apart from himself, included Torricelli, Mersenne, Pascal, and Robert Vallée. So that was one controversy around Magni's publication of the Demonstratio Ocularis. Now I will turn to Magni's explanatory part of his vacuum treatise. So I will go back to the... So he came to the conclusion that his observations prove the fallacy of Aristotelian natural philosophy. The first fact has already been stated, that is the confirmation of the existence of vacuum, which Aristotle denies. So this locus sine locator. Magni writes that Aristotle understood the universe as a continuum, completely filled with objects. If there was to be a void among them, they would not be able to have an effect on one another. Magni confesses that he had always a doubt about the doctrine. Aristotle denied a relationship between the forces of cohesion, which is in conflict with the natural harmony of parts of the elementary world. Without these forces, the elements would move away from each other and not stay together. Aristotle's doctrine also denies the creation of a sublunary substance as a mixture of elements, the assumption of which is the existence of voids that the elementary parts fill. It is here that Magni strongly proclaims atomism. However, he does not see the sensory observation of the vacuum as the confirmation of modern corpuscular theories, but rather predominantly as disproof of the erratic Aristotelian doctrine. The second fact that refutes Aristotle is closely tied to the atomistic theory of motion, which assumes voids through which objects move. Aristotle describes motion as a continuous exchange of positions between individual objects, and thus void is not necessary for the interpretation of motion. Nevertheless, according to his own words, Magni saw a gradual motion of objects in vacuum. When he flipped the tube in which he created void, he observed a slow motion of mercury, water and air, as I've mentioned in the narration. So mercury, void and air moved in vacuum slowly. Similarly, motion with the vacuum was observed when mercury and water filled this void. The observations contradict the thesis of Aristotle's natural philosophy regarding the doctrine, this doctrine of motion. Similarly, motion within the vacuum was observed when mercury and I'm sorry, I read it also. This one. So the observation contradicts the thesis of Aristotle's natural philosophy regarding the doctrine of motion, namely the differentiation between heavy and light objects, where the natural motion of heavy objects is directed downwards towards the center of the earth, whereas light objects are directed upward. Aristotelian physics are unable to describe why mercury, heavy in nature and so directed towards the earth, rises and tries to fill in void. Furthermore, in an environment where nothing opposes motion, that is, in vacuum, a motion should be instant, according to Aristotle. That means it should also mean that the one object would be in several places at once. Magni's observation of an object's slow motion in vacuum demonstrates the fallacy of Aristotle's thesis. In the last part of the description of the experiment, Magni adds that the third fact contradicting Aristotelianism was light, which he saw in the upper part of the tube. That means he observed light here, which was not tied to anybody because there was vacuum, but he saw light there. If the light would be an accident of a substance, as Aristotle maintains, we would not be able to see it in vacuum. We would see only darkness. Magni had seen, however, the upper part of the tube. He saw the entire surface, saw through it, saw colors behind it, colors beyond a vacuum, which means that in the part of the tube where there was no body, no matter, there was void, there was light that was not tied to any other body. The observation of light in the void space proves that light is not inherent in any material subject. According to Magni, a shining object creates its light from nothing and thus does not require Aristotelian prime matter for its creation, nor does it need an Aristotelian subject for change to occur. The visible form, which does not require any matter, is in strict discord with Aristotelian metaphysics, where every substance is comprised of form and matter. Magni considered this conclusion, that means that he saw lumen nulli corpori inherens, the most important. To understand its significance correctly, I will move on to the second kind of controversies that Magni's description provoked. So shortly after the first demonstration, Magni had a disputation with Warsaw theologians, the description of which he had already included in the first edition of this treatise. It was published in Warsaw, Disputatio Theologorum. He was subsequently accused of heresy. The papal nuncius in Poland was altered about the experiment and its interpretation. There was suspicion that the author was attempting to undermine the doctrine concerning the sacrament of Eucharist. It can be assumed that specifically that it was the doctrine of transubstantiation which was tied to Aristotelian substantial metaphysics. It therefore seemed that Magni's attack on Aristotle was, at the same time, an attack on one of the focal points of Catholic theology. Magni was summoned for questioning, and although he defended himself successfully, he was still afraid, as evidenced from his letters, as evidenced from his letters, of being condemned in the similar way as Galileo Galilei had years earlier. So he was really afraid. Despite being suspected of heresy, Magni continued with investigating vacuum. In July of the same year, he conducted a demonstration during which the glass tube miraculously cracked, which is why he was unable to include this description in his publication Demonstratio Claris before he was able to add a reasonable explanation of this phenomenon. Furthermore, in September he wrote the so-called second part, altera pars, of the experiment. So here, in the second part, he demonstrated the existence of vacuum by using a metal tube filled, so long metal tube filled with water. So that was another experiment. After describing the experiment and the interpretation of in the intentions of the first part of demonstratio, Magni surely, after experiencing the immediate reactions to the first experiment, added a justification for his anti-Aristotelianism. So in other editions of Demonstratio, the Capuchin saw no reason why a Christian should rely on Aristotle's authority and why he should trust his natural philosophy. From the point of view of Christian theology, Magni says, Aristotle is fallible, since he does not consider God as the effective cause of everything. It can be argued that thanks to his writings about vacuum, Magni explicitly opened up a systematic campaign against Aristotelianism, not only against a controversial philosophy, but also against a school of thought which is not suitable for Christians, but rather harmful to them. A part of this battle was a treatise De Atheismo Aristotelis, that I already mentioned, so you can find it here, De Atheismo Aristotelis, written in the form of a letter to Maren Mersenne. And also, I can mention this vast critique of Aristotelianism in the first part of his later work, the last work, Opus Philosophicum. The first systematic attack on Magni's demonstrations from the point of view of Aristotelianism came from Krakowian philosopher Jan Brožek, who wrote a treatise entitled Peripateticus Krakowiensis. So Magni again published this attack in the edition of his Demonstratio Ocularis. So that was a common in that time, not only in Descartes' meditations, as Descartes published meditations and critiques of meditations. So it was common also for Magni this strategy to publish the treatise of the opponents and then the reactions on it. Brožek considered Magni's experiments and interpretations to be unfounded, naive belief, and referred to older and newer authors with the aim of encumbering sensory observation as an untrustworthy source of knowledge, as shown by optical illusions. And so on. According to Brožek, philosophy is inclined to Aristotle's interpretation, not because of Aristotle's authority, but rather for the rational reasons presented by Aristotle. He considers the doctrine of void as monstrous, contradicting the logical arrangement of the cosmos, and explains the supposed vacuum by way of Aristotle through the theory of densification and dilution. Brožek adds that talking about void, which is nothing, void is nothing, makes no sense. Void, this is nothing, it can have no purpose, and therefore it cannot come from nature or be created by artificial forces. So Magni himself published Brožek's critique in the 4th edition of his Demonstratio in November 1647, and supplemented it with a response advocating his anti-Aristotelianism. So here you can find some other critiques, some other attacks on Magni from Niccolo Zucchi, Jesuits from Collegio Romano, another Jesuits from Vilnius, Wojciech Kojalovic, French Aristotelian Jacques Pierius, Etienne Noël, that was a famous teacher of Descartes. He also wrote a treatise against Magni and this Johannes Elephantutius, Giovanni Battista Fantuzzi, another Aristotelian from Bologna. But Magni explicitly didn't react on these treatises. He found his own response to Brožek satisfactory because the arguments were only repeated here. The arguments were almost the same. So in his response to Brožek, he radically opposed Brožek's questioning the experiment as simply sensorial, and thus burned with error and not supported by reason. Magni is convinced, in contrast, that he had raised a rational argument. So, although it was the Demonstratio Ocularis, he thought that it was a rational argument. To understand this kind of defense, we must turn to Magni's other philosophical works. So, now I will move to Magni's third De Luce Mentium et Eius Imagine, which was inspired by philosophy of St. Bonaventure, which he tried to elaborate into a scholastic system. This elaboration, although professing a dependence of medieval sources, has a tendency towards a modern subjectivist approach, as philosophy starting from the philosopher's own mind from ego. Magni himself speaks about egoitas. He's creating his philosophy from egoitas. The main features of his dependence of Augustinian medieval Platonism lie first in the theory of introspection, referring to St. Augustine's claim to enter our mind. Secondly, in the distinction between the realm of corporeal things and the intelligible, unchangeable realm of eternal art. So that means the realm of ideas. And thirdly, in the theory of illumination, that was the third part of his third main point of his De Lucementium. The illumination distinguishing illumination by a corporeal light and intellective illumination, but both stemming from God, the Creator. The concept of light actually plays the central point in his philosophy. Light has a crucial epistemological function in Magni's philosophy as a condition of visual perception and analogically in rational cognition, which is impossible without the aid of mental light. And this is not a metaphor. By means of mental light, the human mind compares images of objects acquired from sensual perception with an image previously impressed upon the human mind, and then assesses the veracity of a sensible image. Light also has an ontological function in Magni's philosophy. The human mind flows through two realms. The first one is the realm of existing objects. The second realm is the eternal realm of the ideas of all things. These are the exemplars according to which all things were created, and what Magni called the second realm of mental light and perfect being. Every existing being of the first realm is dependent upon its being in this mental light. Due to this ontological dependency, we can assume the existence of all beings only in the light of this mental light. So now I would like to turn to Magni's treatise on the void. First, it should be emphasized that he did not call it an experiment. He didn't speak about experiment. He didn't use this verse. Of course, the terminology was not stable there in that time. When Magni in his works uses the term experiment, experimentum, he speaks only in the about experimentum mentale, mental experiment. That was the experience, mental experience. So, but here he speaks about only demonstratio, demonstration, which means a demonstration that is accessible through the sight of the corporeal eye. Magni also stated in the treatise that light is a condition of all sensible cognition. Without light we wouldn't see anything. And the sight is the most important sense. So subsequently, there's no chance that his demonstratio ocularis culminates not with the proof of the existence of the void, but with the consideration of light. The last section of his treatise is not only an element of his anti-Aristotelianism, demonstrating the indefensibility of Aristotelian natural philosophy. The demonstration of the existence of void is the precondition for his notion of light. Corporeal vision is the central and only faculty of human cognitive activities to grasp the existence of bodies. Thus, already in his work De Lucementium, light seems to be independent from bodies, but Magni does not go far in this direction. Only his demonstration of the existence of the void, which is visible, provided him with the crucial means for the proof of the essentiality of light as a principle of reality. If light is visible at the place where a body is absent, light is not dependent on any material subject, thus the priority of light in all of creation is demonstrated. Simultaneously, it is evident, according to Magni, that light is indeed the fundamental principle of human cognition, for only through vision can we come to this conclusion. Finally, on the theological level, it was evident to Magni that modern physics did not contradict Christianity. Galilean physics could be harmonized with theology with the help of the metaphysics of light, contrary to atheist Aristotelian philosophy. His reference to the beginning of the Gospel of St. John on light are not the starting point of his thought, but retrospectively affirm the orthodoxy of modern Galilean physics, which is compatible with theology thanks to the metaphysics of light. Moreover, Magni's response to the objections of Aristotelian philosophers can be put into the context of De Luce Mentium in this sense. Jan Brožek, Krakowian peripatetic, objected to Magni's demonstration of the void in that sensual cognition is not a source of perfect knowledge, for it is erring. When we compare the senses and reason, we should prefer the latter, which proves the impossibility of the existence of vacuum. So that's Brožek. Thus, Magni's sensual demonstration is not reliable, for reason proves the opposite. Magni answered in this way. He argued that the existence of void is of course not attainable through the senses, through corporeal sight, but per reason and per mental light. Vacuum, it's a quotation, vacuum is not attainable by means of the corporeal eye, but who observes the tube, he can grasp the vacuum by means of the mental eye. The real sense of these words can only be comprehended with respect to Magni's philosophy. He maintained that the human mind is able to come to necessary conclusions in a syllogistic manner only with the aid of mental light. Every true syllogism depends on a general proposition which is not derived from sensual perception, that is to say, from experience. A general proposition in every syllogism is achievable only via mental light. Therefore, only mental light can come to the conclusion that void is in the upper part of the tube, or that light visible in this part does not depend on any material subject. In his answer to Brožek, Magni even stressed the infallibility of mental light, because it is derived from eternal reason. Magni emphasized the theological meaning of experiments with vacuum by the connection of light shining in the void, that means in nothing, with God's creation of light from nothing. In the late and unfinished work Opus Philosophicum, Magni strives to link the theory of cohesive and separation forces with the metaphysics of light. In the treatise De Systemate Solis, but it remained only in manuscript form, he attributed the separation and mixing of elements to light as a fundamental principle. In accordance with medieval and Renaissance Platonic tradition, he differentiated between light with respect to origin, lux, which is simple light and composed light called lumen. Initial sunlight with respect to origin is the king, the ruler of the solar system. Magni goes on to call sunlight emitted from the solar body the vice ruler, through which elements are separated. In the same work, Magni supported even Galileo's ideas as well as heliocentrism, which he highlighted through the cosmological priority of the sun as the source of light, located in the center of the universe. So light also had a cosmological meaning for Magni. You can see that, but it was not only in the manuscript. In his other work, you can see that there is a quotation that was published after condemnation of Galileo. Ego suscipione astrologia Ioannem Copernicum. Well, so that means that he follows Nicholas Copernicus in astronomy, and in physics he follows Galileo Galilei and William Gilbert. And in the manuscript we find the treatise advocating heliocentrism, because heliocentrism is in concord with the metaphysics of light according to Magni. And heliocentrism is according to him a real Christian view on reality from this reason. In conclusion, I can put the question: what was the real purpose of Magni's experience with vacuum? Magni did not support experimental science as such, as we can see in Robert Boyle later. He performed experiments as demonstrations visible through the eyes. This approach is in concordance with the epistemological priority of sight, and the demonstration of void helps him confirm the essentiality of light in the realm of natural philosophy, in opposition to Aristotelianism. So light is a physical principle, something like substance, but first principle. The proof of the existence of void is also deeply connected with Magni's metaphysics of light. The existence of void is only provable by means of mental light. Mental light, as an epistemological principle, is ontologically dependent on God's light, which is the first being. Thus, Valerian Magni incorporates, in my view, certain elements of Galilean physics into his scholastic system, which was inspired by medieval and probably also by Renaissance Platonism, and saw it as compatible with Catholic theology. The demonstration of the existence of vacuum results in the justification of the essence of light, since its independence is demonstrated on bodies or any kind of material basis. For Magni, this confirms the core of his philosophy based on the metaphysics of light and justifies its priority in the epistemological and ontological sense. His experiments, therefore, demonstrate a specific philosophical background, which of course differs very much from his contemporaries dealing with vacuum. So that's all. It was strange. He was a very strange thinker, but I think it's interesting.